Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Itential webinar. My name is Rich Martin, Senior Technical Marketing Engineer with Itential, and today we will be covering Slack and specifically building automations with Slack integration for real-time communication. Just an overview of what we'll be covering today. We will definitely be using the IAP platform with our Slack integration. And some of the high points we'll discuss and dig deeper into is we'll take a look at the Slack adapter and integrations and how that works in our system. We'll take a look at the Slack API calls themselves, both within their documentation on their website as well as within the platform. So once the adapter is onboarded and configured, we have access to all of that. So it's good to understand those and specifically which calls we'll be using today for our Slack integration. Data transformation always builds upon integrations because as you integrate multiple systems, whether they're network systems or IT systems, messaging and notifications, Slack and the like, you always need to, do things like query, update, create new messages, update messages, create new tickets, query network devices, things like that. That requires the transfer of data and the return of data, and data gets used between all of these different methods, these different calls of different systems, and it has to be transformed to be put in the right format. So we'll take a look at that today. How to transform these messages and data between API calls so that they're the right format for Slack. And then we'll take a look at the actual format for Slack messages themselves, how to get the most out of formatting the actual messages themselves. So for instance, highlighting things that are important. And probably most important is creating dynamic links as a type of Slack message, because this becomes critical as you use Slack as a real-time communications tool for the network or for the entire IT team. And finally, I'll show you a couple of ways of building. So we'll start with fundamentals and a couple of ways of building automations using Slack notifications. So just really quickly, some of the things we'll be accomplishing today in these workflows is being able to query a network device, taking the data from that, transforming it in a way that can be used so that we can post that information into a Slack message in a channel. We'll do something that's probably one of the top uses in applications, within our customer base and queries from potential customers is, can you automate the ability to create new change request tickets, whether it's in ServiceNow or Jira or any other system? And the answer is yes. So I'll show you how to create a new change request ticket, transform that data, because when a new change request ticket is created in any of these platforms, it's usually given a unique identifier, and that identifier has to be used to reference that ticket later on. So one of the really cool things that we help customers do, and this is what makes Slack really, really such a powerful communications tool, is dynamically generating URLs in order to create HTTP links within the Slack message, so that you can broadcast a message into a channel that hits a lot of people on the team, and they can see things like, here's an automation that's running, and here's the change request ticket, that it created as part of the change request process, and dynamically embed that into the HTML link that can be clicked from the Slack message. And then finally, we'll take a look at all the results, and hopefully that'll give you a great idea of how to build upon the integration of Slack into your automations, and then how to utilize all that data between the different systems so that you can efficiently communicate with your team using Slack in the automation. So now let me go and do a screen share with, let's see here. I think this is the right one. Give me one moment. Okay, so what you're looking at is a test workspace in Slack that I created just for this part. So when we talk about integrating with Slack, there's a couple of components to it. The first component is you have to do something in the Slack, in the Slack application itself, and you have to create an app. And to do that, if you go into, now you have to be admin to do this, but I want to show you just roughly the steps to do this so that you have the ability to do the Slack component of this integration. And then we'll focus on the pieces that are inside the Itential platform. But anytime you want to integrate some external code or system into Slack so that it can do things like chat, you have to create an app. So this is universal for Slack. It's not anything specific towards us. And you have to have admin privileges for your workspace. I've created this just so I can show you this safely. So first you create an app. So I'm at api.slack.com, logged in with my credentials as admin for this workspace. And this is a once, you do this once and you're done. Um, so from here, it takes me to a wizard where I can create an app. We can create from scratch. I give it a name, test app. I select a workspace. This is the workspace that I'm using for Slack in this test. Now I just have to create the application. And let's see, from here, I have to do a couple more steps. One of the first steps is I have to go into OAuth and permissions. You'll notice that it's created the app, but now we have to give it permissions to be able to post. So if I come down to scopes and add a scope, what I want is to give it permissions to write. And then there's another one that you can use here as well that's recommended by their documentation is write customize. So this gives now my new app the ability to write or basically post to a channel. So from there, I can go back to basic information. And now I've added that functionality. So the next step is to install my app. So if I click install to workspace, it's going to ask me, do I want to allow it to have access? I do. And now that I've done that, I've installed my app. Now the next step is I have to invite my bot into the Slack channel, and you can do that from here. So here's my test Slack channel. If I just wanted to configure this bot for to have access there, it needs to be added to it. So if I just reference him here at my test app, send the message. It says, hey, it's not in the channel. I can add the channel. And now that this particular application is available to now post to this particular channel. That's pretty much all the setup that you need to do, at least in this very, very general way of using it just to post. Obviously, Slack is a pretty deep application. There's a lot that you can do with it, but by far the use case that we run into most is, teams wanting to send Slack messages as part of an automation as work is working, giving them updates or details, and embedding HTML links to things like tickets or other such applications that are useful for the team to know at that moment. So the last thing here is once that's in there, the last piece here is if we go back to OAuth and permissions, you'll notice here that is now generated a bot token. I'm about to delete this app, but this is the token that's going to be used within the IAP side. So this is something you would use, if you're using some other integration. This token is the access and identifier for this particular application, and it gives you access and privileges to post based off of the permissions we've given it. So that's where this comes from. So keep that in mind. That's where the token resides, and that's how you get to this point. And so if I go back here, I'm just going to delete this app so that because I'm not actually going to use it. We're going to use a live version on our own workspace. Okay, so with that, let me stop this screen share and let me go to another. Okay, and we can continue the demo here. So that first step was, how do we set up from the Slack side an application and give it permissions and generate the token that we need. Now on the Itential side, let's talk a little bit about integrations. You'll notice I have my Slack instance here that we'll be using, but let's start with integrations. If you go to Itential's website, and if you go under products and then integrations, we have an entire pre-built collection available that includes adapters, so that provides integration to different systems, as well as automations. And if I type in Slack here, you'll see that there is an adapter that's available. I'll be using that today. But there's also an entire library of different ways to use Slack notification. I'm showing you a very, very basic set of techniques to use Slack. But if you're more interested, you can take a look at this pre-built automation that we publish freely, and you can take a look at it. It's on Git, and you can kind of go into that and see other techniques and uses for the Slack adapter and the API calls. But when you download this into our platform, it allows you. So if I go into our platform here and I go into Admin Essentials, this is where you can onboard different adapters and integrations. Under here, you'll see we've already onboarded Slack. Let's see, my Slack adapter is right here. That gives me the different selections that I can use, settings that we can set to integrate with the Slack um, application. And then under integrations, we also have Slack here. That's where we actually set up an instance of that adapter or an integration model and make it live. So that's where it has the token and the URL prefixes and things like that it needs. Now, I'm using the adapter here because that's what's already onboarded in the system. If you're familiar with Itential and how we do integrations in our system, one of the things that's important for us and for our customers is that they be able to integrate at the speed they need. So one of the ways we enable that is we kind of decouple the need for our customers to need to rely on us to build an adapter or an integration into a particular system or platform. If an open API spec or a Swagger spec is available for a system's APIs, so that documentation is available, we basically have a wizard that can step you through creating your own integration. So as long as that's published, you can take that file and literally drag and drop it in and create an integration model yourself. Or you can use, like I showed you earlier, the adapter that we provide for our customers ourselves. So there's two ways to do it, and you could start with adapter, and then as time goes on, you can say, hey, we're used to doing things using the open API method that allows you to quickly generate integrations with whatever systems. And as your IT ecosystem kind of changes and moves and evolves, even within different versions of the same application, you can move as quickly as possible without having to wait for Itential or anybody else to generate an adapter for you. So that's helpful. And as an example of that, if you look a little deeper into Slack api.slack.com documentation, they actually do publish an open API spec for their integration. So you could use that method as well. So once that system is integrated into Itential, so now we've done the side on the Slack to create the application. Now we've done the integration, which gives us access to all the API calls that are available. So let's take a look at Automation Studio. And Automation Studio is where we build workflows. And now we've got a bit of a blank canvas here. I want to show you basically a minimalist approach to posting a message in Slack. For that, we can go on our right side. We have, I think of it as canvas. So every system that gets integrated into Itential, their APIs become available here for us to use as kind of drag and drop tasks. And if you look, we have quite a bit of both network and IT systems that are available here. And all of these API tasks become available for automation. So we have our Slack integration here. And you'll notice here, there are a ton of API calls and a ton of them. Some of them are admin, some of them are posting, some of them have to do with files. There's all kinds of things right here. By far, the most used is chat post message. So zoom that in a little bit. So this simply sends a message to a channel. And if I double click this here, you'll see that it's going to require a couple of items here. It's going to need something called body content type. In this case, I'll tell you what it is. It's application/JSON. It's going to require something called some data called request body payload. And it's of type, like earlier, this is a string for this content body type. This is XWW form URL encoded. We'll get to that in a minute. So this is actually where we're going to pass the data that the Slack API method that we're using here to post a message. We're passing the data that it needs. So it needs basically two things. It needs to know what channel we're posting to, and it needs to know what message we're posting to that channel. And we're going to pass that in as a variable here, but we'll do it through a data transformation in a moment. And then the last piece of data we need is a token. So remember when we, at the very beginning, where I showed you how to create an application, put some, give it the scope of being able to write to a channel, and then after that we invite it to the channel, and it also generated that token. That's the token you can use here to identify that particular. It's the authentication token to identify that we're going to be using that particular app instance. So I'm gonna pause right here because I want to show you something, because it's like, well, where does all that come from? That's always a natural question to ask. Like, how do you know all this information? It does require us doing a little digging into documentation. So if you go to api.slack.com, let me show you where that resides. If you go to docs, if you go to APIs, and then the best place to go is to methods, right? This is kind of your library list of everything that is exposed from Slack in API. And you'll notice this looks like what I showed you on our canvas just a minute ago. And this is where you can get all the details you need to understand what all these fields and variables are required, because they're documented here. And again, you can also take a look at some of the pre-built stuff that we've done, because it kind of gives you some examples there as well. You'll notice here's that token, here's the channel, and here's the information it needs. It needs at least one of these text blocks or attachments. In this case, we're just going to be using text. In addition to that, it's got a whole bunch of other stuff that you can optionally pass to it as well. So this is where you get that information from. And of course, there's sample code and things like that. So as you continue to utilize different APIs, whether it's in our platform or in any other platform, technically, it's a good idea to visit the documentation to understand what options are required, what options are available, what are optional, those kind of things. All right, so let's get back to here. So we know we need these three things. I should have saved that, but this is just for an example. So applications/JSON, which is actually defined in the documentation I showed you. We're going to need some variable here, and we're going to compose that in a transformation. And then we need a token here, and I'm not going to use a token for this because this is just as an example, but I'll save that. So now we need to generate that middle piece, which was the data for the body, so the text and the channel. So we can do that. We're going to use a transformation here. So I mentioned a transformation earlier. But data transformation is one of those fundamental things that, as you're building automations, you quickly realize that data coming from some source has to be, manipulated and put into a format that's acceptable for another source. And that's kind of what we're doing here. We've got to create a source of data for this body payload that's acceptable for the chat post message based off of the documentation I showed you. So we do that. The easiest way to do that is through a transformation. And I've already kind of built one here. Let's see. So if I go to Slack, MO0, this is the transformation I've built. And so I'm referencing it here in this API call that's going to run the transformation. But you actually build and design transformations in the transformation designer, the JST designer. JST stands for JSON schema transformation. So I'm just going to use the word transformation for simplicity. Now, the data that we're going to pass into that chat API call for Slack is formatted in this way. So remember, it was URL encoded. So what we're going to do is we're passing along both a JSON object and individual variables as strings to that, because the JSON data is required, but as well as it's going to encode these particular strings into the URL as it passes through our adapter and sends it to the API at Slack. So this is what we need to do. We need to set these things in both areas, and that's pretty simple for us. Just as an example, I want to define the channel in both of these variables. My channel here is, I can use my channel name, webinar-test. And then I'm creating a new string here, and then I can just simply map it to both sections. Now, if I wanted to also define a string, so this is the mess. So I want what's the text message that I want to send? I could create a new string here, and I could put something like, this is a test message. and I can map it to both sides. And notice this outgoing schema here, this is going to be passed into the Slack call. So if I save this now and I go back into the workflow that we just started here, I'll refresh it, the transformation. And now let me go back to the Slack message. This data, this variable, is going to be now sourced from our transformation that I just created. And I'm going to reference the post message that we just created. And basically that's it. So if we were to run this, I don't have the right token here. This is, again, this is an example just to show you the fundamentals, the minimums you need. As I'm telling the requirement for the API call for chat post message is setting this content type, which I'm telling Slack this is an application and expect JSON data. I'm passing this JSON information that's also URL encoded that we just created in the transformation. That includes the channel and the text we want to pass. And then we given the right token, which was generated from when we created the application, passing that along as a string statically here. That provides all the elements we need to now post a message. So let's take a look at that, what that actually looks like in the live environment. So let's take a look at this. So this is the exact same thing we just built. Except I've got a live token here, which we'll just take a look at the Slack webinar demo transformation itself first, because that's where all the action's at. That's where we're defining things. So let's take a look at that, because this is where we start to dig a little deeper into generating messages in Slack, especially in a particular format. So you'll notice everything here is the same. It's the same outgoing schemas. It's the same string. So I'm passing the channel into these two text fields here, and that channel's webinar test, which I'll show you here in a moment. Here's where I've changed things. So I used just a string earlier. I'm using something called a template literal, and that's available here. Again, this is kind of like a palette, and under strings, I can use a method called template literal. So what this does is it allows me to format text in a way that can be now presented, formatted and presented as a string. So I'm going to pass this text as the text to post in our chat channel. And I'm showing you here based off of the documentation. So if you were to Google, chat, you probably know this if you use Slack already, that if you like encapsulate something in asterisks, they become bold, and underscores, they become italic. This is how you could format text for readability, visibility, highlighting things. So I'll show you all the different techniques here. And then finally, this last piece here is a URL link, which is, again, probably one of the most important pieces, because this allows you to now embed URLs into your chat message, and those URLs can be dynamically created using integrations and data transformations, so that they can point to things like service request tickets, or specific devices located through a web console or web dashboard, things like that. So we can generate dynamic URLs as needed, so that everybody has that information and it's a click away. So that's what's going on here. That's the transformation, and this is it. This will, when we run this, will actually just post that message. So let's go ahead and do that. So if I save it and start it here, we can go into Job Manager. Job Manager is where we actually instantiate that automation and start it running. And I'm running this kind of in a test mode where I can visualize it. You'll see it's already completed. So the first step was to do the data transformation to turn that into the information that the chat Slack message, the Slack integration needed to post a message. So it created that information and then posted it to the group. We can take a look at the outgoing message. It said it was a status 200, which if you read the documentations is successful. It gives us an okay message. And so if we reference back to our Slack channel here, you'll notice that this is the data that we formatted in our transformation. And using the format from Slack, we can get bold text, italic, strike through, the code text, which is nice for highlighting things, ordered, bullet lists, and of course, finally our URL link, which allows if I click that, then it goes to Google. And again, this becomes the foundational approach to how we can now start to embed these things into bigger automations. So if we go back to this, now we can start building upon this framework. So let's go the next step. How do different network teams utilize this, or even DevOps teams? How can they utilize this, or any team that needs to do automation as part of a greater automation? So if I go over to demo 2, you'll notice that pretty much these two steps are the same. The transformation's changed. We'll get to that in a minute, because now we're adding something more into this. We're not just going to post static information. We're going to query a device on the network, get some information live from that device, extract that information, and then pass it into the transformation so that it can create the message that it needs now to pass into the Slack API call that'll post the message to our channel. So let's take a look at what we've added here. So if I double click this, this is a very simple and easy way to execute a command on a Cisco iOS device in our environment. So what I'm doing is I'm specifying a specific device that we have in our inventory, and I'm just doing a show config and looking for the SNMP server location that's set there currently. When that data comes back, it's going to return a lot of data. This query is just a simple way to extract that data from the results. So all I want is the SNMP information, that single line. So that's going to extract that out. That is then now passed into the transformation. So I've added a little bit something else to the transformation. I've added something, an incoming variable to the schema. This is the SNMP location that was queried from here and extracted from the query. And so that data comes from this query that I'm doing, and from the output of that. So it's that data comes originally from here, parsed out from here, so that we only have the data I'm looking for, which is that single line from the CLI config. And then it's passing into here, into the transformation. Now let's take a look at the changes in the transformation itself. Here's that variable. So we're inputting that variable that we need. That's the SNMP location string. Of course, this is the same. The channel's the same since we're posting to the same channel. And here we'll take a look. I'm using the template literal, but you'll notice I've got a variable that I'm mapping into it. So how does that work? Okay, so here's the message that we're passing as the Slack message into the channel. I'm specifying in bold because I have the asterisk between the text here. Core ATL2, that's my network device. And here's the current SNMP location. And now I've defined a variable. So when I define, when I create something that looks like in this format, template literal will actually allow us to now map another variable. It will create a variable that can now be mapped into here, so that it can be used dynamically. So now we're getting information dynamically from a network device because I can use these variables, and I don't need that one. That was just for an example. But now I can get data and information from a query to a router, transform that data so that I get exactly what I want, and then parse it and pass it into the API call into Slack so it posts it as a message. So if I go back to the workflow here, we can see those are our steps. Query the device, extract that out. And by the way, this query could have also been done in this transformation. This is a quick way to do it, and I can show you with less variables the foundations of all this, but we could have imported, or we could have exported the data from this right into the transformation and done the query there. It would have created a few more steps in the transformation, and typically that's probably the best practice. But for this, it just shows you, again, the fundamentals and how we can change a few things at a time to get a different result and to now dynamically pull data from whatever source we need. So that data comes out, we'll pass it into the transformation, which creates that chat message, identifies the channel we want, passes it into Slack, and then it gets posted. So let's run it. So again, we'll go to Job Manager. We've instantiated it here, and now it's running. I'll go to visualize mode so we can see it step by step. Of course, this is actually doing a CLI query into a router. So it's doing a show command into a router. So it's going to take a few seconds. It's done. And now all of that's done, and it's building that message and now posting it into our chat channel. We can come back here and take a look. And you'll notice here that here's our new message, Core ATL2 in bold, because we highlighted it in that format. And then here's that data that was passed to it from the query from the query of the router, and then the extraction of that data from that query call itself. This is what was passed in and manipulated and transformed by our transformation itself. Um, and just for fun, we can do a little something here too. We can actually make a change. Let's do this. iOS config. So we can make a change to that device, that same device, really quickly, and see that the data is being done in real time. So I can go here, update SNMP location. Let's see. I will specify the hosts as an array, and the command that I will pass it goes into lines, and I'm just going to change the SNMP server location to virtual webinar. And I'll just fill out a few other fields here. Again, and this is a very quick and easy way to make a change just to illustrate the point. So now we're going to first change this and then do a new query, and it should pop up in Slack with our updated information. And again, this is something now as you start to understand how Slack can be used. Start thinking about consider your workflows, the applications and the different work that you've done or you do on a day-to-day basis. If I can automate that work, now can I also build in Slack integration to update whenever work is being, like perhaps before work is done, including the changes that are going to be done to the network perhaps, and then the status of when the network's done with a validation or a verification that the change has been made. So in this case, we made a change and then we queried the router again to extract the same data to understand that the change was made. And you'll see here when it posted to Slack, it did give us our new updated SNMP server location as now virtual webinar. So now this is how you can start to link things together, right? So this is querying from a network device. You could also, it could be, an SD-WAN controller. It could be any real network device or network system. It could be something in the cloud. Again, integration, once it's in our system, is about processing the right API calls, extracting the data, manipulating the data through data transformation, and then passing it to the applications in the right format, in this case, formatting it for Slack. So that's the second demo, how we can grab information from the network and throw it into Slack, keep everybody updated on things. And again, these are fundamentals. You certainly, as you start building automations that do real work as part of your real day-to-day process, you'll figure out ways, hey, this would be great to update the team to know that work's going on here. Or network engineering needs to know about this because I might need backup if something happens. Network ops needs to know about this because if I'm about to do work on the network, it's good for them to understand the details of that. And that's where Slack is really useful, especially as we can pass data between different network devices, applications, and ticketing systems, things like that. We can pass all the information required to the team so they're up to date, so they can be there just to be aware or to help out. So finally, let's go on to this third section here of this demo. And now this is something that happens that we see all the time as customers start building more and more automations within our platform. Inevitably, two things always pop up. How do I create tickets or update tickets or manipulate tickets? And of course, Slack. How do I communicate data to different teams through different channels in Slack? So I'll show you the basis here. We're going to use ServiceNow, and I'm just going to create a ticket. We're not going to do any updates or anything like that. We've done, you could probably look back at our library of other webinars and integrations that we've done. You'll see we've done a lot of work specifically in ServiceNow, so you can get in depth in that. But for this, the example is just this. When you create a ServiceNow ticket or even a ticket in Jira or any other system, that new ticket, change request or whatever it may be, will have a unique identifier. And that unique identifier is important because usually that's how you can search from the dashboard or the console or the web portal. You can search for that ticket. But more importantly, there's usually a way to access that ticket to access through a URL if you know the ticket information. And that's where this becomes important, because if you know the URL format and you know the ticket ID that was created, now you can format a link in Slack to give direct access to through a click to that particular ticket. And that's what this does here. And this becomes incredibly useful, again, as you're identifying, if you're making changes in an automation, and now you can identify not only the changes that are being made, but the ticket that it references, which will also have all the details of the changes as well. So this helps save a lot of time for people on the team. So first step, again, these two pieces here are the foundation: transformation, the API call to post the message. The only two things that we've changed here is now I'm creating a ticket. So there's a one-step easy process. This is an API call. Of course, we have a ServiceNow instance integration here, and this is a one-step call to create a ticket. So the create change request ticket is the API call that we're using. That's going to require basically one variable, and I'm statically assigning this variable. And all it really needs to create a ticket. Now, you should obviously have more data than this, but for examples, just for an example's sake, all it really needs is a summary description to identify that ticket. And then from that, it's going to create the ticket and pass data back to the automation of all the details around the ticket. The most important thing that we need is the unique ticket ID. So when that data comes back, I have a query. Again, this is going to extract the ticket ID from all of that information. So here's the query. This is a very standard JSON query. If you understand the JSON object format, and I'll show you that in a minute when we run this, you can take a look at where that identifier is stored and reference it very quickly. In this case, I'll show you how it's referenced through response.id. And where does that data come from? It comes from the previous task that was the create ServiceNow change request. So the output of that becomes the object that goes into this query. And then this query basically says, and just give me this data, this particular data here. This is the ID data that we need. And that's all we want. Because then that data gets sent into this transformation, which now formats the text message that we need to pass into the Slack API call to post. So let's take a look at that. So we take a look at that in the designer. You'll notice that the incoming variable that I have defined here, so it's expecting the ServiceNow change request ID that was created, pass through the query, and now it's going to pass into here, and it's going to map into this template literal. Again, if we look at the template literal, this allows us to format the message that we're going to pass, in this case, to Slack. So I've created a header here that's in bold, link to ServiceNow change request ticket. And now using the Slack format for how to embed URLs, which is basically, generally speaking, you use the less than and greater than, and the link text itself comes after the link with a pipe. So the actual URL starts here. And what is this URL? This is our ServiceNow URL. And what I'm doing is I've created a variable that gets embedded into the URL. So once you take a look at how a ServiceNow URL functions, so if I go into our ServiceNow example here, and I could take a look at a existing ticket, and if I click on it, you can, if you kind of decode the URL, you'll notice that there is a field that can be passed to it. That's actually the ticket ID, that unique ticket ID, and that's what we're trying to format here in our URL in our template literal. So I'm formatting this according to the URL format for ServiceNow to identify that ticket ID. So this creates a simple one-step click that goes right to the ticket that we've just created. That's referencing presumably, possibly a network change that could be part of this workflow. Okay, so that's how that all flows. That variable comes in, it gets formatted with the template literal, it gets passed to the outgoing variables as text and channel, same channel here, and then finally that gets posted to our Slack channel itself. So let's go ahead and run it and take a look at that. And this is going to operate. This is going to complete very, very quickly. It did. So we'll go to visualize, and I'll step you through all the different elements. So remember, this is an API call into ServiceNow. The only thing we did was I gave it the required summary. This becomes the short description or the summary description of the ticket. Slack webinar demo. Keep that in mind. We'll see that in a minute. When the the ServiceNow API call comes back to create the ticket, it outputs a lot of data. The one thing that we need here is this ticket ID. This is that unique ticket ID number that was generated for this new change request. That's what we need. All of the other data uh, may be useful for some other reasons, but for us right now, all we really need is that, because we want to generate that unique URL that 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 is exposed in the chat message in Slack. So we need that. So our next step is to query. So remember, this queries data out. It gives us just what we need. So the input of this was that long message that was output from ServiceNow. We're querying out just the ticket ID. And remember, the query itself, if I go back to here, response.id in JSON, if you kind of trace down where that data is, the ID is here. It's located under a response object. So if I can access it directly by saying, give me the data that's associated with the response object and ID, that key, give me the value that it's set to. And that's exactly what that query does. So now it outputs just the ticket ID that I need. That gets passed into that transformation task. So again, our transformation task gets the ticket ID, and then it goes through that template literal and creates the data that it's going to pass, the text message that it's going to pass to Slack. So here's our bold link to ServiceNow change request ticket, and it's now generated that URL in the right format for ServiceNow that embeds the new ticket number that we've just created. That sends that message to Slack through the API call with the right token, and it comes back giving us a status that says, okay, that was successful. So now let's take a look at here. And indeed, here we have our new message that was posted to Slack. We generated that new ServiceNow ticket. In our transformation, we received the ServiceNow ticket ID, generated the appropriate link that allows us to now click into this and go straight into our ServiceNow instance to see that ticket. And here's that summary description that we set. So as you can see, these are kind of the fundamental steps to get Slack integration going, so you can have real-time communication in any automation that you want to build in the Itential platform. It starts off with building the right application on the Slack side, right? So you have to be an admin and create the Slack application along with the right scope so that you can post. You have to invite that new app into the channel that you want it to have the ability to post in. And then from there, you get the right token that you can use within the automation calls themselves. Then you can onboard the adapter or generate an integration in Itential so that you have access into the Slack API. And along with that, we have all of the API calls that we showed. In this case, we're using just the chat post message. The documentation for that is readily available on the Slack site, so you can understand all the options available. And now that you have the API call, the token, and the ability to generate and transform data, you can start building all of these real-time communications, whether you're querying something from the network, making network changes, creating a new service request ticket, and embedding HTML into your chat messages to make it easy to communicate with teams the information that they need to have at their disposal to either assist or just to be aware of what's going on. And so with that, we'll end the demo. I want to thank you very much for the time. Hopefully this was useful, and I will catch you next time. Thank you very much.